Ladies and gentlemen, would you please rise for the arrival of the remains of the late Advocate George Bizos cortege? And could I ask you to remain standing until the National Anthem has been played? Thank you very much. You may be seated. Honorable President, the Bezos family, allow me to greet everyone present at this solemn celebration My name is Naledi Pandor, and I'm the Minister of International Relations and have been asked to be your program director this morning, to be asked on this occasion. I wish to make a few acknowledgements of distinguished mourners who are present today. Allow me to begin with the family of George Bizos, our President, President Cyril Ramaphosa, President of the Republic of South Africa, former President Motlanthe, Premier of the Gauteng province. I don't see him here, but I have him on my list. I understand we have a female acting Premier, MEC Mazibuko. Honorable colleagues, honorable cabinet ministers, honorable deputy ministers present here, the executive mayor of the city of Johannesburg, our distinguished diplomats, the ambassadors of Greece and Cyprus, excellencies, the Treasurer General of the African National Congress, Mr. Paul Mashatile, eminent religious leaders present, leaders from the business sector, our honored veterans, friends of the Bezos family, and all distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I will attempt to ensure that we do proceed smoothly with the program and ask for the cooperation of all those who have a part in our program today. I wish to begin by inviting His Eminence, the Archbishop of Johannesburg and Pretoria, Damaskinos, to offer an opening prayer.
Blessed is our God, always, now and ever, and to the ages of ages.
Amen.
Let us pray to the Lord.
Kyrie eleison.
O God of spirits and all flesh, who have conquered death, overthrown the devil, and given life to your word, give rest to the soul of your servant, George Georgios, in a place of brightness, a place of freshness, a place of comfort, where there is no pain, sadness, or longing. Pardon every transgression which he has committed, whether by word, deed, or thought. For you are a good God who loves mankind. There is no one who lives and is sinless. For only you are without sin, and your righteousness is eternal, and your word is truth. Let us pray to the Lord.
Kyrie eleison.
For you, Christ, our God, are the resurrection and the life and the comfort. For your servant Georgios, to you we ascribe glory together with your Father who has always existed, and your all-holy, good and life-giving Spirit, now and ever of ages. Amen. Θα επιθυμούσα ο Father Αθηνόδωρος to read in English one small message on behalf of me.
This is a translation of the message of Archbishop of Johannesburg and Pretoria, the Maskinos, to the family of the late Advocate George Bizos. It was with great sadness that we learned of the passing of your beloved father and grandfather. As esteemed member of our community, George Bizos was both a luminary and a beacon of hope for the Hellenes of South Africa. The Archdiocese holds George Bizos in high regard due to his many accomplishments that he's done not only for South Africa but also for the Greek community. George Bizos respected and loved the Greek Orthodox Church. In a telephonic conversation with our Pope and Patriarch, informing him of the Advocate's passing, his Beatitude recalled how the late George Bizos found refuge in our Patriarchate of Alexandria in Egypt during those terrible years of the Great War, the Second World War, and how he was accommodated at the Kaniskerion school for a while, and he often expressed the wish to visit Alexandria and his old school, but unfortunately this was not to be. We pray that you find solace and comfort in your father's legacy. We have much to be proud of. May his memory be eternal. With paternal blessings and love, His Eminence the Maskinos Archbishop of Johannesburg and Pretoria.
As I indicated, this is a solemn celebration because this is a life to be celebrated. We mourn with the Bezos family, but we celebrate with all of South Africa such a great life. I now invite the Honorable Acting Premier of Gauteng, Acting Premier Mazibuko, to deliver the welcoming remarks.
Thank you very much, Program Director, Minister Naledi Pandor, and thank you for allowing us as the Gauteng Provincial Government to stand in front of yourselves as we bid farewell to Ndate Advocate George Bizos. Let me respect the family, the sons and daughters-in-laws, grandchildren, and all relatives who are closer and furthest from the Bizos family. His Excellency, the President of the Republic, Ubaba Cyril Ramaphosa, former Deputy Chief Justice, Ntate Moseneke, ministers and deputy ministers present with us here today, the Mayor of the City of Johannesburg, Ubabu Jeff Makubu, the Treasurer General of the African National Congress, Ubaba Umashatile. Let me also acknowledge the Ambassador of the Hellenic Republic of Greece. Let me also acknowledge all the ambassadors and high commissioners present here today, the religious leaders who are here, the veterans, all protocols observed in case I did not acknowledge you accordingly. Indeed, as citizens of Gauteng, we are in mourning with the passing of this great giant, a legal eagle who fought for the rights of many of our countrymen and women. Death be ashamed, because we take away great people. Graveyards are rich with men and women. Scriptures will always say, on the last day, they all shall rise and sing Hosanna as the trumpet sings. I'm standing here on behalf of our Premier, Ntate David Makura, who unfortunately is not feeling well today, and he sends his condolences. As the Gauteng provincial government, we are indeed mourning the passing of Ntate George Bizos. NgesiZulu siyayisithi, kohamba amaqhawe, kosala izibongo. Wabu Bezos uyibekile induku ebali. I officially welcome all of you present here today who are accompanying the family of our late father to his final resting place. Relax and don't be afraid, and let us all celebrate the life well lived. I hope when the president speaks, he will add Jerusalem for all of us to dance. Thank you, Nyabo.
The lady who's assisting us wants to spray my hands again, and I've refused. Because my mother used to tell me a little bit of germs are not bad for you. Could I now invite Mr. Alexi Bizos to read the obituary? And I shall ask us all to rise as he does that.
What I'm going to read out is a précis of a very long obituary that my brother Kimwan and sister-in-law Mary in the UK put together. And there was a little bit of confusion, and so we would be here for another hour, I think, if we went through it. And I think part of our digestion of our father and grandfather's death is that his life was so large, and that we knew. But with the outpouring of anecdotes and all sorts of messages on social media, in the newspapers, in wherever, one realizes how full it is and how difficult it is to actually obituary. George Bizos lived for 92 eventful and productive years. This brief obituary is a selective summary of his achievements and work with and for many remarkable people. George was born to Adoni and Anastasia Bizos on November the 15th, 1927 in the village of Vasilitsi in the south of Greece. His parents farmed olives, and George was the first of their 4 children who survived infancy. Andoni was mayor of the village and arranged road and water connections, but he was deposed in 1936 when the right-wing Metaxas dictatorship that came to power through a coup d'etat came in. George attended primary school in Vasilitsi and Koroni, then started secondary school in Kalamata. George's schooling in Greece ended when Italy declared war on Greece in October 1940. In May 1941, at the age of 13, George, his father, and others from the village helped 7 New Zealand soldiers to escape from Nazi-occupied Greece. They attempted to sail to Crete, but were adrift for 3 days before being rescued by a British warship. They were taken to Alexandria, as you'd heard earlier from Archbishop, where his father took the decision to evacuate with other refugees to South Africa. The pro-Nazi Assewa Brandwag were angry that Jan Smuts was bringing the vuil goed, or the rubbish of Europe, to South Africa. Unable to speak English or Afrikaans, George worked as a shop assistant in Johannesburg until the teacher recognized him, the teacher Cecilia Feinstein, as the refugee mentioned in a newspaper, and insisted that George start at Melbourne Junior High the next day. George later matriculated from Atho Boys. From 1948, he studied for a BA LLB at Wits, where he became politically active and served on the SRC. George married our mother, Aristide Daflos, a Johannesburg-born art student from a Greek family. They were married for over 60 years until she passed away in 2017. They set up home in Parktown North in the late 1950s and had 3 sons, Kimon, Damon, and Alexi, and 7 grandchildren. George's mother, Anastasia, visited Johannesburg in the early to mid-1960s. She dug up a stretch of lawn to establish a vegetable patch. George then became a devoted gardener, using the time for quiet thought. Many benefited from his vegetables, including clients in prison. George joined the Johannesburg Bar in 1950. A friend of Nelson Mandela and Oliver Tambo, often acted as an advocate for their law firm. Early in his career, he acted for Trevor Huddleston of Sophiatown and defended small rural communities against the effects of apartheid laws, including in Zeerust after protest against the extension of past laws to women. At the Rivonia trial, he was a junior member of the team that defended Nelson Mandela and others. The accused were spared the death penalty. George is credited with advising Mandela to add the words, "if needs be," if he was prepared to die. He defended many others who struggled against apartheid, including Bram Fisher, who was a significant personal and professional influence in George's life, the accused in the Nusas trial, Rob Adam, the accused in Delma's trial, Albertina Sisulu, and Barbara Hogan. And it's this part of his life that there's such a volume of cases, just too many to mention. He represented Winnie Madikizela Mandela on more than 20 occasions. He defended the Namibians, Andimba Toivo Yatoivo, as well as Morgan Tsvangirai when he was charged with high treason in Zimbabwe. George represented the families at inquest into the deaths of people in detention, including Luke Smart and Gululi, Ahmed Timol, Steve Biko, and Neil Agate. From the mid-1980s, Nelson Mandela asked George to be his emissary for discussions with the exiled leadership of the ANC. George never joined the ANC, but in 1990 he became a member of the ANC's Legal and Constitutional Committee and an advisor at CODESA. George joined the Legal Resources Centre in 1991. He helped draft legislation, particularly the Truth and Reconciliation Bill and human rights amendments to the Criminal Procedure Act. He led the government legal team which ensured that the Constitution was adopted by the Constitutional Court. He was appointed by President Mandela to the Judicial Services Commission and later by President Mbeki, and served 15 years on the Judicial Services Commission. He was a lifelong campaigner against the use of the death penalty and led the team that acted for the government arguing that the death penalty was unconstitutional. At the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the TRC, he was the leader of the team opposing applications for amnesty on behalf of the Bika, Hani, Ganiwe, Kalata, Mkonto, Klauli, Slova, and Skoon families. TRC's legal team for the families of those slain at Marikana, initiating the forensic work that exposed the massacre and placing evidence before the Farnham Commission. In 2018, the LRC inaugurated the George Bizos Human Rights Award to recognize those protecting, upholding, and advancing a culture of human rights in South Africa. Beyond his legal career, George placed a high value on inclusive education and Hellenism. He chaired the Saheti School Board for many years, and a scholarship fund has been established in his name. The scholarship was one that he, some time ago, initiated. George received several awards, including the Order for Meritorious Service from President Mandela, and was made Commander of the Order of the Phoenix by the President of the Hellenic Republic. He was granted freedom of the city of Athens, London, and Johannesburg, as well as several honorary doctorates and recognition by legal bodies in South Africa and internationally. As a family, we celebrate George's courage, dedication, and unflinching commitment to justice, which was grounded in passion, wit, and empathetic humanity. He lived with boundless energy, optimism, and selflessness. We will remember him. Rest in peace, Dad, Papu, Uncle George. Thank you.
Advocate Bezos was a man who was described as a fierce cross-examiner, a man who would defend those who often would enjoy no opportunity for a strong defense. A man of the people indeed. I now wish to invite His Excellency, the Ambassador of the Hellenic Republic of Greece, Ambassador Roussos Koundouros, to speak.
The President of the Republic, Your Eminence, the Archbishop, ministers, distinguished guests. George Bizos, a 13-year-old schoolboy, left Greece in 1941 as the dark years of the country's occupation by Nazi Germany were beginning. Advocate Bizos, later in his life, was destined to defend freedom and human rights in South Africa. Freedom and justice are evidently of the highest importance for this country, its history, and its people. And George Bizos is rightly celebrated and admired for his ideals and courage, as well as his determined action over the years, next to Nelson Mandela and others, in the noblest struggle for freedom and democracy for all. Bezos, moreover, marked a generation of South African Greeks living and working here and substantially contributing to social pluralism, and the general progress. His important legacy to the Hellenic community, also the wider education in South Africa, includes decisive contribution in the founding of the well-known South African Greek school in Johannesburg, the Sept. He also played a prominent role in promoting understanding, close and friendly bilateral relations between South Africa and Greece, and I believe he immensely succeeded in that as well. Greece is deeply respectful and grateful for what George Bizos stood up for and what he achieved in South Africa. I am convinced that his great example can inspire all South Africans who wish the future in democracy, human rights respect, and social fairness. On behalf of the President of the Hellenic Republic, Prime Minister Mitsotakis and the government, and myself, I express deepest condolences to the Bezos family. Αιωνία του η μνήμη.
Thank you very much, Excellency. Could I now invite, speaking on behalf of the grandchildren, Mr. Nicholas Bizos.
Good morning, President Ramaphosa, Your Eminence Archbishop Damaskinos, dignitaries, my family, fellow mourners, and to all those watching in South Africa and beyond. My name is Nicholas Bizos and I'm George's grandson. I'd first like to thank all those that have sent messages of condolence and sympathy from across the world over the past week. It's been quite stunning to see the outpouring of adoration, admiration, and gratitude for the life that Papou lived. My cousin Lucia, based in the UK, summed it up when she said, "I knew Papou was well known, but the last few days have really brought home how much he meant to people." It's also nice that through the interviews and interactions with family, people are getting to see that he was more than just a big lawyer. I stand before you all paying homage to my Papou with multiple conflicting emotions. The problem with having someone as revered as Papou is that you come to believe he's immortal. There's now deep sadness that he has finally passed on, yet some relief that the suffering of his last few months has ended. A heavy heart that his home now sits empty, that he's not in his bedroom or in his vegetable garden, yet a warmth in knowing that he is reunited with our beloved grandmother and his wife Rita. Agony that there are no longer long, memorable, important stories to hear him tell, but immense pride that his stories are those that will be told forever. Every turn that Papou made, every weave of the tapestry that is his life, was done with the honest and devout intention of making things better, of doing something right, something to correct an injustice or help relieve someone's suffering. There was never selfishness, avarice, or fame as his goal. Guided by his principles of fairness, equality, and justice, Papou aimed at changing lives through his knowledge and use of the law. As mentioned a few times, materialism was never a part of his life. His beginnings were humble, his middle was humble, and he was humble at the end. The impact that he had was always through his actions and his words, never through what he owned or accumulated. Injustice irked him. It is what drove him to be who he was. He never wanted anyone to practice hegemony over another based on some immutable characteristic. He saw the humanity in all, and gave his lifetime to promoting and protecting this humanity. A number of reflections of Papu's life since his passing last week have used the Kavafi poem highlighting the journey to Ithaca and how the path to the destination is what defines you. Given how his actions were his greatest achievements, I'd like to use a different quote from Kavafi, which reads, "From all I did and all I said, let no one try to find out who I was." His actions defined him, and given the consistency in the memorial seen and heard in recent days, these actions were always the same, aimed at improving the lives of all South Africans and holding himself and those around him to the highest possible expectations of ethics and integrity. Like his good friend Nelson Mandela, to whom he was deeply loyal, his life was always bigger than what we as his family could comprehend. He gave completely of himself to his wife, children and grandchildren, but also to the thousands of families that have passed through Sept, the school he helped found nearly 50 years ago. He also gave of himself to the children and family of those he defended or sought justice on behalf of. And he gave himself to South Africa through his work on the Constitution and guarding the human rights of those that call South Africa home. It's that complexity and color to his life that I've always known about and have come to appreciate as I become older, hopefully wiser, and far more aware of his impact on the history of this beautiful country. I know he hoped that those that follow him will continue to give of themselves in making this country what he and his contemporaries envisioned. And I trust that the leaders of South Africa will continue aspiring to make these visions of a just and fair South Africa a reality. The enduring memory I'll have of Papu is how his humility was always present. He never saw himself as bigger than just a man. He wore his fame well. His time was always best spent by being present, whether it was with the family, him on the street for a word or a handshake, or with presidents and prime ministers. A story I'll never forget is how, when we were together in Greece many years ago, Papu had been invited to give a talk somewhere, and this somewhere was far away enough from the house that an offer had been made for a car to be sent to fetch Papu, and Papu refused. I couldn't quite understand why, to me then, and still probably not, importance and prestige. When I asked him why he didn't want the car, he said, when they look back in the books one day in the future and see that money was spent to fetch someone called George Bizos, I don't want history to think that I thought myself so important that I... Well, Papu, unfortunately, history will judge you as a good man, a man who made the world better for his existence, and a man who will be remembered in South Africa, Greece, and beyond for many years to come. We love you and we'll miss you.
Thank you very much to Nicholas for that wonderful tribute. I'm sure all of us have a picture in our heads of Advocate George Bizos. Mine is the shock of him insisting that you call him George. And you are meeting this person you wish to respect, honor, and he says, call me George, and insists on it. The other picture I have is Advocate Bizos and Arthur Shaskelson in the old assembly chamber in Parliament, always, Mr. President, at theme committee 4 on the Bill of Rights, sitting there like sentinels, watching what would go into that chapter 3 of the Constitution. Allow me then to invite again Alexei Bezos to speak on behalf of the family.
Good morning, Kalimera Sabona. Thank you for your attendance in honoring our father. I'd like to make some acknowledgements. Importantly, I mention our late mother up front, Ariti Katarini, who died 3 years ago on the 2nd of September, 2017. I'd also like to acknowledge my partner, Jane Lipman, and my sister-in-law, Anna, for their tireless efforts and support in making sure that my father was comfortable in his waning years. It is sad that my brother Kimon and sister-in-law Mary and their children could not be with us today. Their care and support, even at a distance in our father's last years. Also, my nephew Nicholas, my niece Eleni, and my daughter Anna Sophia, who in this time of COVID assisted in the last few weeks in our father's increasing frailty. I'm confident that their presence through our father's final stretch in his odyssey was comforting to both of them and our father and grandfather. I'm sorry that our family has shared our father with the nation for so many years. Why should it be any different in his passing? In less than a week, we have had to put together your office the funeral program under difficult circumstances in the time of COVID. On reflection, it has been quite a task ensuring that the protocol of our Orthodox Church that date back short of 2 millennia and that of the state do not clash, all the while attending to concerns of our family. The dictates of principle and compromise had to come to the fore, and I believe that my brother Damon and I have been well schooled in this regard by our father. I acknowledge the presence of Matthew Chaskelson. Matthew, in a telephone conversation, tried to suggest that with the limitation in numbers, that he make space for another. We would not have anything of it, as we honor the deep friendship and work that both our fathers did over decades. I also acknowledge Nosizwe Nokwe, who is here, daughter of Duma Nokwe. Our father spoke so fondly and vividly of his friendship with Duma at a time that the apartheid regime so desperately tried to forbid such friendships. Thank you, Nosizwe. And we are so pleased that last year we could finally get our families together for a lunch and spitbraai. Our father appreciated it very much. I've been in touch with my Grasa Michelle, who so deeply wanted to be here, but is stuck in Maputo due to COVID restrictions. Our telephone conversations are replete with echoes of the most special friendship that our father had with Tata Mandela. The Legal Resources Centre was home to our father since 1991. I acknowledge the presence of Thandi Lane, Chair of the Board of Trustees, and Nursing Governor, Executive Director of the LRC. Also, Janet Love is here, the former Executive Director, who in her tenure a few years ago, together with the trustees, took the initiative in establishing the George Bizos Human Rights Award. As awards go, the first went to our father, and last year the second was awarded to retired Deputy Chief Justice Moseneke. Our family looks forward to working with the LRC so that the institutional arrangements necessary in selecting and profiling recipients and their causes are durable and long-lasting. I would also like to acknowledge the presence of Selo Hatang of the Nelson Mandela Foundation. Seda's care and wit in his kind and gentle interactions with our family and the tremendous help he has given since our father passed has been invaluable. Selo, we look forward to working with you and the Foundation in preserving our father's legacy. His legacy is Tata Mandela's legacy. And there are so many in the legal profession whose lives he touched, and he was touched by. Too numerous to mention, just too numerous to mention, though I think it would be opportune to acknowledge Advocate Sidney Kentridge and Dennis Cooney, who I expect would be viewing these proceedings from home. Mentioning any others would put me in a difficult position, as there are so many. You know who you are. There are also so many other acknowledgements that are needed. As a family, we have been overwhelmed by the outpouring through letters of condolence and press statements in regard to our father's passing. Numerous institutions such as the University of Witwatersrand and the Nelson Mandela Foundation the Federation of Hellenic Communities of South Africa, the HIP Alliance, and NADEL are going to be hosting memoria and symposia in honor of our father. Details will be posted on georgebizos.com. On this website, there are links to Saheti School and the George Bizos Saheti Scholarship and Bursary Fund that were so dear to him. Any donations to the LRC and or the scholarship fund is in his memory would assist in continuing his legacy. I'd like to focus on my father's legal work and some unfinished business. Since the TRC and the publication of his first of 3 books, No One to Blame in 1998, he has, together with others, want to hold perpetrators to account. His retort to critics of the TRC was that the TRC recommended the prosecution of 300 named persons. The fact that there has been little action in that regard should not be laid at the door of the TRC, he would say. Similarly, the Farnham Commission of Inquiry into the Marikana massacre. The recent reopened inquest in the Timor case and the impending reopening of others gave tremendous hope to our father that justice will be done. We commend the efforts of lawyers such as Attorney Murray Hawthorne and Advocate Howard Varney and the Timor family in this regard. Just as our father was mentored by the likes of Izzy Maisels, Bram Fisher, and Vernon Berenger, it is now up to the younger generation to continue the odyssey to justice and through that freedom. Let us hope that George Bizos' legacy is not dishonored through inaction. Let us give expression to George Bizos famously saying at the Farnham Commission that apart from the LRC representing the family of a victim, the LRC's client was also the Constitution. Born a Greek, stateless for 31 years, yet becoming a proud patriot and South African citizen, some say a hero. He died a South African and a Greek, but above all, a human being. On a lighter note, when asked who he would support in a soccer match between South Africa and Greece, he would say he hoped it was a draw. Hamba Gatle, Dad, may you rest in eternal peace with our mother at your last resting place. Ionia Tisimnini, may his memory be eternal. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alexei, for that wonderful message. Could I now invite former Deputy Chief Justice Dikgang Moseneke to speak and pay his tribute with a recollection of wonderful anecdotes in his very new book, All Rise. Former Deputy Chief Justice.
Go leboga mme Moradisi, mme Ngaka Phando. I've prepared a very brief script. I would say my little piece very quickly, but let me first do what I have to do and bring my greetings to the Bezos family. After which, Your Excellency, the President of the Republic of South Africa, President Ramaphosa, His Eminence, Archbishop Damaskinos, the Honorable Acting Prime Minister of Gauteng. Indeed, there are several honorable ministers and other functionaries of state, Kitlisa Trompo Holuna, and indeed all reverend clergy here present. Thank you for this morning. friends, compatriots, leaders of our army, ladies and gentlemen, I'm truly privileged to make this brief tribute at the request of the family of Advocate George Bizos, SC, and indeed in the stead and place of our vast legal profession, the only, besides many other worthy things he has done, profession he served so meritoriously for virtually all his adult life. Our profession, the bar and the bench, are in mourning, and yet all of us are doffing our hats in deep and abiding respect as we mark the departure of one of our very finest. Alexei called me 2 days past on, excuse me, saying his father is rather unwell, and I better come home to see him promptly. The call was reminiscent of the call Uncle George and I received from Mrs. Gracia Machel on that fateful night of the 5th of December, 2013. Uncle George and I both rushed to Tata Mandela's home in Houghton, but we were both a little late. So after Alexei's call, I said to Alexei, I will come to see Uncle George past Thursday at 2 p.m. On Tuesday, a tearful Alexei phoned again saying Baba or Bapu had not made it. Again, I was late to say goodbye to Bapu. I had come to the house earlier, a few weeks before, and we took a picture which has a place of pride in my recent work, All Rise. In 65 years of friendship, a book written by George Bizos, he renders an absorbing and heartfelt account of the enduring friendship with our departed President, Rolihlahla Mandela. The friendship was founded in mutual abhorrence for injustice and inequality, and reciprocal affection, respect, and fidelity. The book narrates a riveting tale of how, in the 1950s, George Bizos and Nelson Mandela met at the University of the Witwatersrand. They both pursued postgraduate Bachelor of Laws degrees with a view to qualifying as president, and both were outsiders, two, if not foes, of the apartheid ruling elite. George Bizos was born Greek, was an immigrant, and sought to be admitted to South Africa, circumstances which are well known, escaping the Nazi oppression in Greece. Nelson Mandela was a denigrated citizen in his land of birth. Mandela's studies screeched at a halt because of racial profiling and proclivity of robust political activism. In contrast, George Bizos qualified, joined the ranks of the practicing council. In that precast dichotomy, Nelson Mandela has become the incessant political accused and trialist for charges related to the Defiance Campaign of 1952, followed by the treason trial of 1956, his own trial to 1961, later his own trial of 1962 after the Scarlet Pimpernel escapades, and ultimately in the Rivonia trial, in which he and members of Mkhonto High Command were sentenced to life imprisonment. Uncle George was there all that way, if you don't know. On the other hand, George Bizos was to become a dedicated and trustworthy counsel through all these multiple trials of Nelson Mandela and other leaders, but more importantly, throughout these daunting decades of imprisonment. Over the 27 years of imprisonment in Robben Island and later at Victor Verster prisons, George Bizos visited Nelson Mandela and other leaders and unfailingly provided support for his family and filial needs. He went beyond bounds sometimes. He served as a trustworthy political envoy to Oliver Reginald Tambo and to other highly placed activists. After the release of Nelson Mandela up to ascendancy to the presidency of the Republic, their tried and tested friendship flourished, albeit in a markedly different setting. Mandela's own tribute to the enduring bond between him and George Bizos appears in his affectionate foreword in George Bizos' biography, Odyssey to Freedom. Their close companionship persisted for another 23 years, from the freeing of Mandela from prison to his passing on again on that fateful night of the 5th of December, 2013. For one thing, my 10 years imprisonment on Robben Island coincided with Tata's presence there and George Bizos' frequent visits to him. However, I met Uncle Bezos only after my release, and I became an attorney and later a practicing advocate and a member of the bar, and I became his chief and prime junior in cases I'll say a few things about. Only a few examples will suffice. Together with Uncle Bizos, we did much. We successfully defended Dr. Fabian Ribeiro, facing charges of abetting and harboring members of Umkhonto weSizwe. And later, he was killed by army intelligence. So too his wife, Comrade Ferenc Ribeiro. We together defended Tamim Kwanazi and the young Ronnie Mamweba, yet to become the renowned communicator and activist. May his soul rest in peace. And other ANC activists, I'm afraid without success, they went to prison. We successfully appeared for Ingwapele Madingwani, the famed author of the anthology Africa, My Beginning, charged for possessing his own banned publication, i.e. his own poem. Together, we defended Zolakhe Sisulu, Lalangokolo Fogabao, fearless and inimitable editor of The New Nation. After his release, Nelson Mandela asked Bezos, Tata Bezos passed Langa, and who later became our Chief Justice, again may he rest in peace, and me to defend his wife, Nomzamo Winifred Madikizela Mandela, in the so-called Stombi charges. I had to live, and I did, with great privilege, with Uncle Bizos for 6 months as we defended Comrade Nomzamo. When it was not all fashionable, particularly to white South Africans, George Bizos chose the side of the powerless, of the tormented, and the oppressed. He chose the side of the village of Bakaping, people near Zeerust, who were facing apartheid eviction. And he tells marvelous stories about his interaction with the chief of Bakaping. He resisted the eviction with and for them. He chose the side of Neil Agat, didn't he? The side of Amel Timol in the inquiry into the mysterious and callous deaths in police custody. He was there for the family of Steve Bantu Biko as they searched for circumstances of Bantu's murder in police cells, and so too into the death of the Craddock Four, who disappeared in police hands with no trace whatsoever. And in a happier time with Uncle Bezos, we went onto the boat that ferried me to Robben Island, this time to go and appear for our colleagues and comrades who were on strike on Robben Island, who demanded to be released immediately after Mr. President, the CODESA agreement had been signed. And at the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, he batted for several victims of our inhumane apartheid system. As though he had not done enough, George Bizos was there for the families of the miners who were killed at Marikana. Comes the time to retire and to rest. No, not for Baba Bizos. He served as House Counsel for the Legal Resources Center, and we thank the center for having housed him the way he did and having inducted a George Bizos Award for Human Rights. And I'm ever thankful for being the first recipient of the award after him. What a stamina, what resilience, what steadfastness, what dogged commitment to justice, to freedom, to others with whom he had no racial or ethnic or ephemeral or external attributes. He cared only because they too were human. He deeply hated oppression, inequality, and unfairness to his deathbed. In the time I became a judge of the High Court and later Justice of the Constitutional Court and finally the Deputy Chief Justice, every time Uncle George Bizos appeared before me as counsel in the Constitutional Court, I suffered the deep awkwardness of a mentee, which I was. I, who sat at his feet and learned so much, called upon to judge, my seasoned dawn, leader and master. George continued to remind me in his note that we had now both become close friends, perhaps in my case, the son of Tata Madiba Mandela. For many years, Tata Madiba sought our joint advice on a whole range of matters. We advised him in relation to his litigation with his erstwhile attorney, sadly against two of his children, and we had perforce to litigate against his former wife. He appointed us as joint executors to his will, the deceased estate. When I sought to come and visit Alexia at the house, I had said to you I'd hoped that you'd be able to sign the final document that have to be filed with the master to conclude the estate, Yagatata Umatiba Mandela. As I said, I bemoaned the fact that I came late. And we are both trustees in his family trust and are obliged to look after Mr. Mandela's affairs and beneficiaries to his trust. In a sense, Tata Mandela joined me and Tata Bizos at the hip. As I conclude, let me remind you that he was not all fire and brimstone. He was human. Out of that garden, Damon, we had that salad cut up and chopped up. And your mother would move to the kitchen and bake that fresh Greek bread and with olive oil and would feed on the salad and chopped and the bread. And he would insist that he wants to tell a story. And he'd say to me, you listen, it is a genuine Greek village story. When you are in a Greek village and you want to sell a donkey, you better spread a rumor that you want to buy a donkey. And I'd say, Uncle George, why? And he says, you better do that. That is the rumor you must spread around. You quickly come to know what is the going rate, what is the going prices, so that you can buy your donkey within proper limits. At his 80th birthday at Saheti, those who were there will remember, and Sophia, you will remember that, for which he did so much, Saheti School, for which he did so much to found and to grow, and to ensure above all that it is integrated. It admitted children who were non-Greek and were principally African children. We all heartily sang birthday to you, Uncle George, and you were in your thoughts, in your spirit, and you gave a full account of yourself. But to my surprise, at my mother's 90th birthday, you, Baba George, there you appeared, right there. Not in the middle of Sandton or some fancy place, in a village called Mabopane in the northwest. And there you were hugging my mother to come and celebrate her 90th birthday with you, only 2 years ago. You were a remarkable human being. You cared so much for others. And I am deeply proud that I live so close to your life. Our profession will sorely miss you. I hope, particularly to all those young lawyers, we will draw and drink from that eternal fountain of high values. High values that is shared with none other than our founding Chief Justice, Arthur Charles Colson. Your life has to remind all you lawyers, and indeed all you young people, what it is to live fully, to live vigorously, to live with principle, to live well, and mainly for others. Good night, Ntate Bizos, and I wish you strength, Damon Alexei, and indeed all the children, as well as your absent brother. I thank you.
Ra leboga motlotlegi o buile sentle thata ra mo itse yaanong. I received the condolence statement of the government late last week. The statement records a seminal constitutional case in which a leading role as a member of the Supreme Court of the case concerned the father of the former foreign minister who sent me the statement, Dr. Charity Doe. Her father was a foreigner in Botswana, married to a Botswana woman. And the Constitution of Botswana had a clause in it which prevented the children of parents of whom one was a non-citizen from enjoying full citizenship. The Supreme Court of Appeal, which included Advocate Bizos, struck down that provision. And Dr. Charity Doe, through that work, was one of the children born of one foreign parent who was able to serve in the government of Botswana. So as I execute the privilege of inviting our president, the Honorable President Cyril Madamela Ramaphosa, to deliver the eulogy, we celebrate George Bizos not just as a human rights advocate in South Africa, but a man of influence in our region as well. Honorable President.
Let's be seated, please. Program Director, Minister Naledi Pandor, the Bezos family, ministers and deputy ministers, the acting Premier of Gauteng, Ms. Faith Mazibuko, the Mayor of the City of Johannesburg, Mr. Jeff Makubu, the Treasurer General of the African National Congress, Mr. Paul Mashatile, retired Deputy Chief Justice, Justice Dikgang Moseneke, the Eminence, the Bishop Damaskinos, leaders of a number of non-governmental organizations that are here that George Bizos worked with so closely, the Legal Resources Center, the Nelson Mandela Foundation, and many others. Members of the legal fraternity who worked with George, ambassadors, fellow mourners. There are very few in our society of whom it can be said that an entire generation should follow in their footsteps. It is not many who are of such distinguished reputation that they are known simply by not just in their own social circle, but in this entire country. It is only the rarest of individuals upon whom the title Champion of the Oppressed is bestowed. George Bizos was such a man. As we say, has fallen. A tree that gave shade to the patriots that founded our great nation and sheltered the poor, the marginalized, and the vulnerable. We're here to celebrate and also to bid farewell to a titan of the legal profession whose defense of the cause of justice was, as it was, lifelong. George Bizos arrived in South Africa having escaped native Greece. He was just 13 years old and was a refugee. His was a deeply personal experience of being forced from one's home and of being treated like a second-class citizen in the land of one's birth. He knew the pain and of being stateless and rootless. There can be no doubt that his personal background influenced the great well of empathy, of compassion, of passion as well, and solidarity drove George in the practice of his craft, the law. He was, in his own words, a lover of freedom. The love of freedom would put him on an inevitable collision course with the apartheid state. He was destined to be an activist lawyer and a champion of the liberation struggle. We read in his memoirs how it astounded him that he, a refugee from Europe, had more rights in South Africa than the black majority, born and bred in South Africa. He could not and would not accept how he, a white immigrant, could be well-fed, clothed, educated people of the country lived in squalor and deprivation. This George would not accept. His activism really began when he was a student at the University of the Witwatersrand in the late 40s. It was at university that, as we have heard, he first met Nelson Mandela, and he would later go on to defend him and others in both the 1956 treason trial and the 1963 Rivonia trial. This was the start of a lifelong friendship, which he describes so well in his book, 65 Years of Friendship. President Mandela would later write that George was like a brother to him, and that he was greatly comforted that during his long imprisonment, his family was being looked after by his friend. At Wits, he joined the Student Representative Council and soon became involved in the struggles of black students on the campus. The apartheid government punished him quite severely by denying him citizenship for over 3 decades. And there he was, living stateless in a country that he had adopted. George's biography relates that the refusal letter told him he was not fit and proper to become a South African citizen. But the rebel-rouser that George Bizos was, he would not go quietly. He never laid claim to having been a firebrand or a revolutionary. He sought neither honors nor recognition, and he was not given to talking about himself. He did not desire fame. Even when apartheid ended, he never brandished his past to cover himself in glory and to loudly proclaim to the world where he was during the fight for liberation. George Bizos never did that. He never did that because he was there. He was always there. At every crucial point in our country's history to liberation, George was there. Quietly, but also loudly. Unassumingly, but also forcefully. The courtroom was his front line, and the law was his key weapon. That political movement does not mean he was apolitical. He understood that to love freedom means to forever be political, and that defense of the rights of every man, every woman, every child is in itself a political act. He defended freedom fighters and the leaders of the struggle because he believed in justice. George Bizos was a man guided foremost by his conscience, by his principles, by his ethics. We all know of his presence in some of the most famous trials in our history. We've heard about some of them from Alexei. We've also heard about some of them from former Deputy Chief Justice Dikgamu Seneke. Being on the defense team at the Rivonia trial was a baptism of fire for George. He was still a young lawyer, but he made his mark with his legal prowess, and let it be said, with his street smart as well. It is recorded that he forewarned the trialists that the government was planning to hand down the death penalty on all of them. As the story goes, and as it is well known, he proposed that Madiba, who had written the speech that we all know now, that Madiba should add words, if needs be, into the statement from the dock, averting that would, for all intents and purposes, be an premeditated miscarriage of justice. Over the course of his life, George defended many leaders of the struggle like Trevor Huddleston, as we had, Govan Mbeki, Walter Sisulu, and many others. But they were not just his clients. They trusted him and also became his friends. He played in the hearings of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. He was trusted by the families of Ahmed Timol, Steve Biko, Neil Argett, the Craddock Five, the victims of apartheid death squads. They trusted him to represent them. He did so faithfully, opposing the amnesty applications of the killers of Chris Hani, Ruth First, Jeanette and Katrine Skroon, and many others. Those of us who attended the hearings and even those who were watching around the world remain in awe of George's tenacity, as well as a razor-sharp questioning that reduced the once of apartheid crimes to bumbling, fumbling at the witness stand. But there was also away from the glare of the television cameras of the world. As our journey to democracy beckoned, Madiba asked him and Arthur Chaskelson to be part of the ANC's Legal and Constitutional Committee, working alongside a number of other ANC leaders. George and Arthur politely but pointedly asked whether they were required to join the ANC. Madiba said, "That is definitely not a requirement." It was not so much of a relief from Arthur and George, but they had expected that Madiba would not require that they would join the ANC. Fashioned the constitutional principles that are today of our Constitution. And then there was George Bizos, who led the team for the Constitutional Assembly to certify the first Constitution of democratic South Africa, and who also assisted its drafting. George Bizos brought a unique quality, personality, and intellect to bear on his knowledge of the law and the constitution of our country. His contribution has simply been quite extraordinary. And his influence on our constitutional democracy is without any doubt felt not only by those in the legal profession, but by many South Africans. Then there was George Bizos, the philanthropist, who was a founding member, as we have already heard, of the Saheti School, and who established a scholarship and bursary fund for needy students. There was George, always known fondly and simply as George to the young lawyers he mentored, who was a founding member of the Lawyers for Human Rights and the Legal Resources Center. There was George, always prepared to share the fruit of his vegetable garden, regaling young lawyers with stories of cases past, to the history of the olive tree or the symbols of ancient Greek history. And if there was a person who could regale anyone with stories, it was George. The man was a great talker. The ultimate purpose of the law is the guarantee of justice it promises. And George remained faithful to the notion that the law must serve the public interest above all. During his life, he mentored many lawyers, and today we've just had a confession from former Deputy Chief Justice Moseneke. Many of them are prominent in their own right and now are on many other places. Much of that learning happened outside the courtroom and away from the chambers, in hours spent driving with him to court over a warm, leisurely, and enlightening lunch. It seemed at times his energy was limitless. Neither the onward march of age nor frailty could hold from the courtroom, nor from his office. He was a legendary wit of equally legendary, but with devastating effect to opponents during trials. Upmanship was reserved for the courtroom, never for young lawyers, clients, or even other senior counsel lined up at his door seeking help or advice. He treated everyone as his equal and with respect, from silks to judges, to the unemployed young man who had been illegally evicted, from ministers to the elderly woman who did not receive her grant. He was on the right side of history. When the democratic government fell short of its obligations, or when big business abused its power, he and his colleagues acted on behalf of the vulnerable. For him, the struggle did not end with democracy, but would only end when every man, every woman, and every child in our country enjoys the rights promised to them in the Constitution. We do owe it to his legacy to finish the business that George started. The injustices that happened under the death squads, detentions under apartheid, must still all be laid bare, and the dignity of those who still do not know what happened to their loved ones still needs to be restored. The law must continue to be an instrument of protection for the most vulnerable of our citizens, be it against individuals, businesses, or the state. The same spirit that drove young men like George to enter the legal profession should serve to inspire other young to enter the field of human rights law. George has finished his odyssey. He has run his race. The legal profession and the country is poorer for this great loss. Indeed, a great baobab tree has fallen. On behalf of the people of South Africa, I offer my deepest condolences to the Bezos family, and I do thank them for giving us this great giant and for being prepared to share him with us as a nation. It was said by our former rulers that George Bizos was not fit for purpose, or fit and proper. If having conscience, principle, and commitment, and standing up for what is right, no matter the cost is, not fit and proper, may we all be granted the courage to be regarded as neither fit nor proper. It was Archimedes of Syracuse who said, "Give me a place to stand, and I will move the earth." George was indeed a son of the soil, not born of it, but he was the soil itself. He will forever be remembered, and we will remember him in his robes, rising to address the court and smiling, leaning on his cane as he whispered to his clients and his protégés. From where he stood, in his own unique way, he did move the earth. He was a hero, and he became a citizen of South Africa, and a proud one for that matter. He was the embodiment of a proper South African citizen. It was an honor and a privilege to have known the man who lies here. George, your friend of 65 years, Madiba, is waiting to welcome you. Your other good friend, Arthur Chaskelson, is waiting to discuss the legal cases that you both got involved in, and some of those that you argued before him as Chief Justice. I say, fare thee well, good friend. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable President. Please be seated, ladies and gentlemen. I now have the honor of asking the Chaplain General to assume his responsibilities. Chaplain General Jamangile of the South African National Defence Force. May I hand over to you, sir?
Commander-in-Chief, permission to conduct the devotions and military honors. I thank you. To our mother, who's directing this program today, Mama Naledi Pando, our Honorable Minister. To the Commander-in-Chief of our armed forces in the Republic of South Africa, His Excellency the President. To the grieving family of George Bizos, and friends and extended family. To our former Deputy Chief Justice, to our Acting Chief of the South African National Defence Force, Lieutenant General, His Eminence, Honorable Bishop, and Father Ethos, to our national leaders, provincial leaders, and local leaders, to our distinguished guests and dignitaries. Allow me to acknowledge all expressions of faith that are watching this funeral and that are here today. As I begin, as we gather here this day, paying our last respects and tributes to the memory of a great stalwart of the struggle and iconic freedom fighter. Hear what the Lord says. By faith, Abel offered God a better sacrifice than Cain did. By faith, he was recommended as a righteous man when God spoke well of his offerings. And by faith, he still speaks even though he is dead. George Bizos still speaks even though he is no more. It is said that of George Bizos that he was a man of faith growing up in the Greek Orthodox Church. He was a man of faith. It was in this climate of faith that his passion for justice, equality, fairness was nurtured. When young George Bizos landed in the shores of South Africa, 3/4 of the population of this nation were utterly powerless. His work as a lawyer, political activist, fighter for human rights throughout his life and time ensured this nation and witnessed the dawn of a new political dispensation in 1994, when all South Africans of hue and stripe went to the polls to cast their votes for an all-inclusive government. He was an incredible human being. There is a stark difference in being a human being and being human. Today, as we celebrate the life and times of George Bizos, a unique human being, a unique Greek-born South African, George Bizos was human in the true sense of the word human, because he had empathy and compassion for the marginalized. He made room in his heart for the desperate and dispossessed. All his grandeur, self-esteem, and strength were compatible with humility and simplicity of devotion. George Bizos knew in his heart of hearts that God had a future for South Africa. He was tested and tried by the forces of apartheid. His faith carried him far beyond his day. He allowed hope to feed his soul and lift his spirit, and in so doing, he became a living testimony that we are to meet tribulations with triumphant fortitude. So today, we gather here not in sadness, but in a spirit of heartfelt gratitude that God, in his infinite goodness and wisdom, allowed our paths to cross with that of George Bizos. We are grateful indeed to God that he allowed us into so close communion with somebody as brave and courageous as George Bizos. Here was a man who saw in trouble a counterbalance of life. Here was a man who knew that trouble gives balance, poise, and tensile strength. He took life as it came from God, incident by incident and minute by minute. He was not embittered by the adversity he encountered. I believe that George thanked God for it, for he saw the hidden blessing. He understood the dictum that no other goal but the will of glory of God will draw the best out of human being. He knew that God does not work in vacuum. God does not work in the abstract. God works through human beings, and God's method is human beings. God's unlimited power and resources are available, but useful only as they are human beings who are committed to his cause for justice and truth. I believe this morning that in the economy of God, George Bizos was indispensable where he was. Placed by God himself here at the southernmost point of Africa to be an outlet of God's grace. He believed that he could make a difference, and what a difference he made. Belief matters. It makes all the difference in the world. Belief makes difference between a true human being and a jellyfish of human being. Human beings who don't stand for something, they fall for anything. George Bizos believed with a passion that burned like wildfire in his heart. As I conclude, his belief, like that of Nelson Mandela, Walter Sisulu, Governor Mbeki, Ahmed Kathrada, Lillian Goni, Fatima Meer, and other countless of others, were the foundation stones of a new South Africa. This belief for the struggle of a new South Africa put fire in their blood. They believed in something that their belief carved out the new South Africa. Finally, Commander-in-Chief, for God's sake and for the sake of these great leaders, including George Bizos, and in support of you, sir, let us not tolerate pathetic kind of success in a cause that is doomed to failure. And yet, there are men and women who line up in this kind of cause, taking the short view of things, demanding the payoff long before it is done, thinking that they are winning, only deceiving themselves, pinning their hopes to futility, sinking their lives in a worthless enterprise that is based on lies. I am glad that somebody said, to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. I am so glad that George Bizos has found grace in the sight of God. God bless Bezos' family. The Lord shines his face upon you, give you the strength, for the memory of the just lives on. God bless you. I thank you. Will be observed. Bearers, Master Warrant Officer Khadebe, Master Warrant Officer Fulgyun, Master Warrant Officer Botha, Master Warrant Officer Mnisi, Master Warrant Officer Majogo, Master Warrant Officer Ngema, Master Warrant Officer Rabutabi, Master Warrant Officer Dube, Warrant Officer in charge, Chief Warrant Officer Bapole. Take post.
The family and the President are requested to follow the military procession, and then we shall depart to the site of burial as follows: the cortege, the family, and His Excellency the President. As we have come to the conclusion of our celebration of this life, I thank you all for having allowed us to run this program most efficiently, and for the wonderful tributes that all of you have presented today. Lala ngotolo, Dada. I thank you.
I see. protest earlier on